Good afternoon. Let's come to order and go on the record. I am Commissioner Tanola D. Brown Bland with the North Carolina Utilities Commission, the presiding commissioner for this hearing. And with me this afternoon are Commissioners Daniel G. Clodfelter and Jeffrey A. Hughes. I now call for hearing docket number W-1300, sub 60, in the matter of application of Old North State Water Company, LLC, 3212 6th Avenue South, Suite 200, Birmingham, Alabama, 35222, for authority to adjust and increase rates for providing water utility service in all its service areas in North Carolina, filed pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 62-134 and Commission Rules R1-15 and R1-17A. On June 29th, 2021, Old North State Water Company, LLC, hereafter ONSWC, or applicant or company, filed an application requesting approval to adjust and increase rates for all its water utility systems. In support of its application, ONSWC filed the direct testimony of John Mcdonald and Laurie Oakman. The company filed the revised pre-filed direct testimony of John McDonald on July 29, 2021. As filed, the company's application requests a 68% increase over the total revenue generated by its currently commission-approved rates. The company states in its application that the requested increase is necessary because it has been operating at a substantial loss and its current allowed rates do not support its current operations. The applicant has also requested uniform rates for all of its water service areas or systems in North Carolina. The pending application for increase is the first general rate case filed by the company since it began providing service in the state of North Carolina in 2014. On July 26, 2021, the Commission issued an order establishing general rate case and suspending rates. On September 21st, 2021, the Commission issued order establishing discovery guidelines, scheduling hearings, and requiring customer notice. The order scheduled a public hearing for the purpose of receiving customer and public witness testimony by online video conference meeting using the WebEx platform on October 7th, 2021, and further set the hearing to receive testimony from expert witnesses to begin on December 2nd, 2021. On October 27th, 2021, the company and the public staff whose intervention and participation on behalf of the using and consuming public is recognized pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 62-15D and Commission Rule R1-19E, filed a joint motion to extend the testimony filing deadlines and to reschedule the expert witness hearing. In that motion, the company waived its right under North Carolina General Statute 62-134 to put new rates into effect 300 days after the filing of its application. On November 16, 2021, the Commission issued an order rescheduling expert witness hearing and extending time to provide testimony, which, among other things, rescheduled the expert witness hearing to be held Tuesday, March 8, 2022, at 10 o'clock a.m. in the Commission hearing room in the Dobbs Building, 430 North Salisbury Street in Raleigh, North Carolina. On November 23, 2021, the company filed updates to revenues, expenses, rate base, and cost of capital. On November 29, 2021, the company filed a notice of intent to place temporary rates into effect, a motion for approval of financial undertaking, and a motion for approval of notice to customers of rescheduled hearing and temporary rates. On November 30th, 2021, the company filed a correction to its notice to customers of rescheduled hearing and temporary rates. On December 14th, 2021, the Commission issued an order accepting financial undertaking and approving notice to customers of rescheduled hearing and temporary rates. On February 8th, 2022, the public staff filed the testimony and exhibits of witnesses Charles M. Junis, John R. Hinton, and Iris Morgan. On February 22nd, 2022, the company filed a rebuttal testimony and exhibits of John McDonald and Laurie Oakman. On February 24th, 2022, the company filed the applicant's motion to file rebuttal to public staff supplemental testimony, and in its motion, the company stated that the public staff had indicated an intention to file supplemental testimony by March the 1st, 2022, and requested an opportunity to file rebuttal testimony thereto, as well as an opportunity for discovery related to the public staff's anticipated supplemental testimony. The public staff filed a motion for leave to file supplemental testimony in response to ONSWC's motion on March the 1st, 2022. Along with its motion, the public staff filed the proposed supplemental testimony and exhibits of witnesses Junas and Morgan. On March 3rd, 2022, the commission granted the parties' motions, allowing the public staff to file supplemental testimony, allowing the company to file rebuttal testimony to the supplemental testimony, and permitting the parties to take discovery on the supplemental and supplemental rebuttal testimony. On March 7th, 2022, the company and the public filed a joint motion to excuse witnesses, and also on March 7th, the company filed the supplemental and rebuttal testimony of witness Oakman. Today, a number of filings have been made by both parties. Today being March the 8th. And Commission's record showed the filing by the company of late filed updated Exhibit 1 of Laurie Oakman, of the company and the public staff's joint settlement agreement and stipulation with pre-filed exhibits, the company's settlement testimony of John Mcdonald, and the public staff settlement testimony of witnesses Junas, Hinton, and Morgan. Also today, the commission issued an order rescheduling the expert witness hearing and denying the motion to excuse witnesses. Pursuant to General Statute 163A-159E, I remind members of the commission of our duty to avoid conflicts of interest. And I inquire at this time whether any commissioner has any known conflict of interest with respect to this docket. The record will reflect that no conflicts have been identified. And I will now call upon counsel for the parties to announce their appearance for the record, beginning with the applicant.
David Drews, appearing on behalf of Old North State Water Company.
Thank you, Mr. Drews.
Nasha Magruder, appearing on behalf of the public staff and the using and consuming public.
Good afternoon.
Rita Coxton, appearing on behalf of the public staff and the using and consuming public.
All right, good afternoon. Before we get started, number one, I would like to ask, due to filings coming in sort of rapidly here at the end, and due to a set of complicated filings before then, if either of the councils noticed that I got anything wrong in the opening, I'll give you a chance to correct that now. If you picked up on anything, I think I caught it, but if I missed something, the record will reflect no one is coming forward, so we assume that I had it correct. Before we get started, ladies and gentlemen, I don't like to have to do this, but I feel compelled to. This hearing, as you know, was originally scheduled for December 2nd. And on the motion from the public staff, the commission rescheduled it for March the 8th and extended all of the deadlines for the initial and the rebuttal testimony. And then the public staff asked for a 1-week extension of time to file its initial testimony, and along with a corresponding extension for the company's rebuttal testimony. That shortened the time that was available to commission and the staff to review the testimony, but we granted that motion because we always like to be accommodating and work with the parties to the extent that we can. We understand everybody's under considerable pressure these days. However, last week, a week before the hearing, the commission granted motions for the parties to file supplemental and supplemental rebuttal. And in that order, the commission reminded the parties that our schedules are important and the orderly management of the matters coming before the commission were important. And then, as of Thursday, March the 3rd, the parties communicated with commission staff that it anticipated filing a stipulation and that the testimony would come in on Monday morning. That was Thursday. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday passed. And on Monday morning, the day before the rescheduled hearing, the parties filed a joint motion to excuse the witnesses, signed by counsel. And that motion stated that the parties had resolved all the issues through a stipulation and that stipulation was being filed contemporaneously with the motion. And in fact, no stipulation was filed with the motion to excuse the witnesses or at any time on Monday. So from the commission's point of view, that was a misrepresentation. And that misrepresentation, that the representation that the parties had a stipulation, and it appears they didn't, and that was disappointing to the commission. Monday came and went, and by email today, by email yesterday, the commission staff reached out at the direction of this presiding commissioner to the parties and told them to expect an order to rescheduling the hearing for 10 o'clock, moving the hearing from 10 o'clock this morning to 1 o'clock today, which is why we're here at this time and hour, or this hour and date. And the commission, but the commission did not issue that order because we were still waiting to see if the stipulation would come in and we would evaluate how much time we would need for our staff to review and understand the stipulation, and we could, so that we could have meaningful dialogue here today and be able to question the witness. So through this whole time, it is my understanding that the parties did not keep the commission and its staff in the loop and only answered questions about the status of the stipulation when asked. At the scheduled time for the hearing, 10 o'clock this morning, with no order issued, we didn't receive communications from the parties inquiring about the order, and commissioners and staff came here to see if anyone had come to the hearing room, and in fact, no representative for the parties had come to inquire or otherwise make appearance. Then just minutes before we convened at this time, we began receiving various filings. The stipulation came in a little earlier, and then we received testimony within the last hour was still being filed. So I bring this up because that's not the way the commission expects the parties who appear before us to deal with the commission or the commission staff. First, the commission is accustomed to and expects no less than to be kept informed and have constant communication of status at any time when we are within a week of a scheduled evidentiary hearing, and when the case, the issues, the witnesses, or anything having to do with the case would affect the conduct or could affect the conduct of the hearing. Whenever is changing, is in flux and unresolved, we expect to be kept in the loop. We expect the flow of communications to be two ways and to be continuous. Second, it shows, in my opinion, a level of indifference and disregard for this tribunal, for our time, and for the commission process, and quite frankly, for the customers and the public who will be affected by your decisions and the important decisions of this commission. It leads to inefficiencies in the process, and if the commission allows it, it could lead to additional avoidable rate case expense. Moreover, the message that the commission receives is that our process and our procedures do not matter to the parties, and that once the parties reach a conclusion or a settlement on their own, that somehow the matter is resolved or ends there. But this commission is not just window dressing. Our decisions are not expected, should not be expected to be just rubber stamped. And when the stipulation comes in, we need time to review that and work with that. So needless to say, the commission is disappointed about that. We're starting late today. We had hoped we would conclude the matter in terms of taking in the evidence today. We're not quite sure that will be able to happen, as we've still been taking in and processing the filed information. We'll do our best to make sure that happens, but if it doesn't, we will just have to come back and reconvene on another day, and you'll receive a order scheduling the time and the date for that. Having said that, and to be fair, we will hear from the parties, starting with the applicant. Should you have anything you wish to say in light of the commission's understanding of what has transpired and how we come to where we are today. So, Mr. Drews, if you have anything to say.
This is certainly a process we hope will not happen again. And the witnesses here have been in pretty constant contact with public staff last week, through the weekend, today. We had a settlement late last week based upon an oral negotiation. Getting that down in paper and ironing out all the details took a lot longer than expected. We really are regretful for the problems this caused the commission. I do feel that coming in with a case that the parties have settled is ultimately beneficial to everyone involved. It's just unfortunate it took so long to get there.
All right, thank you, Mr. Drews. Public staff, is there any response or anything you wish to say?
I think we would sort of endorse what counsel for Old North State has shared with this commission. We were working diligently with Old North State to make sure that we had a finalized settlement agreement that reflected sort of the oral negotiations that our office and Old North State engaged in on Thursday. Sort of in the flux of making sure that that language sort of reflected what the parties agreed to. We did not, as you put forward, alert the commission to all the ongoing sort of updates with regards to making sure that the settlement agreement would be filed along with testimony. And again, we are very sorry and obviously will endeavor to be much more mindful of the commission's need to have information when it needs and to obviously comply with the procedural order. And again, we'll just reiterate that we are sorry for not showing in our actions sort of the appropriate deference to the commission and obviously in addition to customers. So I apologize with regards to that.
Thank you, Mr. Marguerite. And the commission takes note of what both of you had to say and the regrets that you expressed. However, we do want to make sure that message is received loud and clear that we are to stay in communications in situations like these. We hope to avoid this type of limbo that the commission found itself in this time around. So with that, I would Commissioner Kleinfeld.
Madam Chair, for me, this goes a little bit beyond disappointment. And it's not just about a failure of communication, but also a failure of process. I don't appreciate receiving materials that are highly important to the disposition of the case, literally within the hour or so before the hearing. And at least during my time here, it's not been uncommon when parties are confronted with the situation that you faced for you to suggest that the commission consider postponing the hearing until such time as you've had an adequate opportunity to mobilize yourselves and get your papers filed and allow the commission and the commission staff adequate time to review those papers and those filings to determine the course of the hearing and the most efficient way to conduct the hearing. We're going to be proceeding this afternoon in a way that I don't think is necessarily going to be the most productive use of anyone's time. This is not the only matter before this commission, and you know that. And so while we've been treading water, We could have, in the alternative, been making arrangements for an alternative hearing, at which time we could have all been better prepared and proceeded in a more orderly fashion. I will say this for myself. If I were appearing in front of this panel as one of the counsel today, and if instead of on this dais, you had the three of us, instead, if you had Howard Manning or Donald Stevens, then I would be leaving this hearing room without my head. I'd be carried out on a stretcher without my head. And so for me, it's more than a matter of disappointment. I guess we're going to proceed, Madam Chair, but I frankly don't intend to be forced to conclude this hearing until I've had an adequate opportunity to study the papers put before us and the new testimony filed for the first time within the last hour.
All right. So with that said, are there any other preliminary matters regarding the substantive case before us? Mr. Drew?
I would just note that the company filed a late filed exhibit to update rate case expense this morning, and so the ultimately the revenue requirement, if the public staff upon reviewing it agrees, would need to be adjusted somewhat for that. And that's something, of course, that the parties can take care of in proposed orders.
All right. Anything from the public staff?
Nothing from the public staff.
All right. Then the case is now with the applicant.
We've called John McDonald to the witness stand.
All right, Mr. McDonald, I believe we are being streamed to somebody, to the public, so be sure that you get the mic close to you.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you sincerely, place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right. Do you sincerely and solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right. Your witness.
Mr. McDonald, would you state your name and position with the company for the record, please?
My name is John McDonald, and I'm the managing member of Old North State Water Company.
And did you cause to be pre-filed on June 29th, 2021, 13 pages of direct testimony in this docket?
I did.
And did you also cause to be pre-filed on July 29th, 13 pages of revised direct testimony?
I did.
And did you cause to be pre-filed 17 pages of rebuttal testimony along with McDonald rebuttal exhibits 1 and 2 on February 22nd, 2022?
Yes.
And did you pre-file today, March 8th, 2022, 2 pages of settlement testimony?
I did.
Okay. Do you have any changes or corrections to make to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, on pages 3 through 6, since the filing of my direct testimony, the number of systems, customers, and gallons sold have been updated, along with the schedule showing pro forma rate base and revenues and expenses. These changes are reflected in the company's rebuttal testimony, but now have been replaced by the numbers in the settlement agreement and exhibit. And also on page 6, lines 9 through 12, while Old North State has never sought a general rate case covering all of its water systems, I should clarify that a water rate increase was granted in the transfer docket for Twin Lake Farm, sub 10, and a wastewater rate increase was granted in the transfer docket for Horse Creek Farms, sub 19.
And, excuse me, with those changes, if given orally from the witness stand today, would your answers to the questions in all your pre-filed testimonies be the same today as when they were filed?
Yes, they would.
Okay. At this time, we would ask that the pre-filed testimonies of Mr. McDonald be incorporated into the record as if orally read from the stand.
That motion is allowed.
And we'd ask that his exhibits be marked for identification as indicated on the pre-filings.
And that motion is also allowed.
Mr. McDonald, do you have a summary you're prepared to deliver at this time?
I do. I would like to ad-lib just a bit here and add my apologies to those at council, to the commission. I regret that this is the first time we've appeared before you all, and it's in this manner. Due to significant financial losses under the existing rates, Old North State Water Company filed a rate case last June. This has been a difficult rate case for two reasons. First, we have not previously prepared a rate case in North Carolina. The accounting and procedures are very different from our utility business in Alabama, and previous employees and a partner with regulated utilities experience were to serve as the liaisons with public staff and the commission. Since those relationships were terminated, we were left without the experience similar utilities have in-house. Second, we had significant operational and service problems with the former operations contractor that was handling our North Carolina systems. Fortunately, the public staff worked extensively with us to get Old North State's filings in proper order. Since terminating the operations contractor in 2020, I'm proud to say we have hired operations staff that made significant investment in operational improvements, which resulted in better water quality and better service to our customers. Water quality issues and the improvements we are making and continue to make are addressed in the report on consumer comments that we filed on October 27th, 2021, and in my rebuttal testimony. We have agreed with the public staff to file quarterly reports on water quality issues at the systems of greatest concern, Fishhawk Ranch, Old Mill Trace, and Blaney Farms. Other areas of concern are the record keeping on in-service dates for our water systems, billing of customers before commission approval of rates at certain systems, and the failure to collect tax gross up on CIAC from developers for the Bellaterra, Arlington Manor, and Brook Meadows systems. Despite the confusion created by the previous employees and regulatory liaisons, I take full responsibility for those oversights and commit to the commission going forward. The company will not charge rates prior to commission approval, nor will the company neglect to collect tax gross up on CIAC as required. The company and public staff have agreed to resolutions on these concerns. My rebuttal testimony addressed the method for calculating whether refunds should be made for bills under temporary rates. We have agreed to work with the public staff to establish an appropriate methodology for determining if refunds are due with respect to temporary rates. Old North State Water Company supports the terms of the settlement agreement and its exhibits as reasonable compromises when taken as a whole. I urge the commission to approve the settlement and establish new rates in accordance with the settlement. This concludes my summary. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald's available for questions.
All right, is there any cross?
No cross from the public staff.
All right, the commission does have some questions. So, Mr. McDonald, you acknowledge that the company had unlawfully billed customers for water service prior to receiving a CPCN or approval for a contiguous extension, and you have committed to compliance in the future. What's your understanding of why the company's applications posed a problem in this regard for the company? And what would you do differently in the future in this situation?
I believe that there were delays on several sides. There weren't any good answers, but the short answer, I believe, is that we would file promptly and then stay on top of staff to make sure that they're addressed in a timely fashion as well.
These customers that receive these bills before proper approval, were they being served prior to the company starting to provide service?
No, ma'am. These were new systems, I believe.
These were new systems. And did you have discussions with the public staff about seeking to have temporary rates placed into effect?
At that time, those discussions would have been had by previous employees and or a previous partner that was handling all liaison with the public staff. So I can't state as to whether or not they had those conversations.
Now, if the customers weren't receiving service, I assume they had not moved into their homes. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yes, ma'am.
And so And until they would have water service, they would not have certificates of occupancy. It would be my understanding.
As I understand it, yes.
And so from the commission's point of view, you would either, the proper thing to do is either get the temporary approval or just not provide the service. But I understand from your testimony, you felt there was no viable alternative.
I thought the decisions that we had to make, none of those were good. Either not provide service or not bill and increase our losses. I didn't, they were all bad choices, I suppose.
Well, it's a very bad choice to violate the regulations that are in place, put in place by your regulator.
I could not agree with you more.
All right. My next question is, the public staff has accepted Integra's commitment to fund the capital needs of Old North State in exchange for withdrawing its proposal that Integra inject or infuse equity into the company. What resources does Integra have to support the commitment?
Integra has adequate financial resources and a balance sheet to fund Old North State on a go-forward basis. It has been doing so and will continue to do so.
Are you speaking of cash? What do you have to, what wherewithal do you have?
We have cash and the investor, Integra.
Is Integra able to borrow without a separate backstop?
I guess when you say separate backstop,
With regard to Old North State, there was an indication that they had to have your signature in order to do it. Is Integra able to borrow without having
yes, ma'am,
some such security?
it is.
All right. Now, what's the capital structure of Integra? That is the debt to equity ratio.
It's, I believe it is about 40% equity.
And then 60% debt.
Yes, ma'am.
What debt, if any, has recourse to Old North State's utility assets? In other words, is any of Integra's debt secured by the company's assets?
No, ma'am.
Has the company considered applying for low-interest loans through the state's Drinking Water State Revolving Fund to finance eligible water infrastructure improvements?
No, ma'am. My experience with those funds is they generally are allocated to public entities first, but I'd certainly be interested if that's a viable alternative.
Is that something you're willing to check into?
Yes, ma'am.
And initially, the company proposed uniform rates for all of its systems, including the purchased water systems. Can you explain the reasoning for that request, just generally and specifically as it regards the purchased water systems?
I believe we felt like uniform rates across all systems were what was anticipated or desired, if you will, and then through subsequent discussions with public staff have learned that it is better to have those rate structures slightly different to reflect those purchased water rates.
All right, and were there within the company, were there some systems that have large and unique costs as compared to others in the system?
In the purchased water systems or in general?
In general?
There are some that have some, I mean, operationally, they're all similar. There's some that have had some larger capital needs due to filtration and things as such. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
In your opinion, there's not one system or a number of systems that have that are outstanding or extreme in terms of their costs compared to other systems within the company?
Operationally, I think they're all fairly similar.
And you expect that situation to continue over time?
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any systems that are unusually cost-effective to operate or maintain?
Probably the purchase water systems.
Why would that be? What makes the difference?
Well, it's you're reselling water that you purchase from a local water entity. And so there's not as much treatment associated with those systems,
So,
if any.
wait a minute. Just a second, I lost my place here. But, so the question was, and you answered with regard to the purchase water systems, and you're saying, the question was it unusually cost effective to operate or maintain? And you say the purchase water systems are have less cost, is that what you're?
I would submit they're maybe a bit more efficient to operate because you don't have to treat the water.
And you expect that situation to continue every time as well?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And in your opinion, are all the systems in acceptable working order at the current time?
Currently, yes.
And on average, they should have similar upgrade and maintenance costs.
On average, yes.
If the company were to continue to have system-specific rates, would some of the customers potentially experience extreme or extreme changes in their billings, or what we call rate shock?
Very much so.
And do you have an instance in mind that you could describe?
Yes, ma'am. For example, Twin Lake Farms, one of the systems, we just installed grain sand filters for about $250,000. And it's a relatively small system. So trying to recover that capital cost would be difficult and expensive.
And when you install those filters, is that something that you worked with the public staff on? Did you have discussions with the public staff about the green sand filter?
We did have some discussions. I don't know how far ahead of time it was, to be honest with you. It was going to be a requirement as we understood it. So we made the investment we take our customer service rather seriously. And so that was going to be a requirement. And frankly, to provide good water to those customers, we really wanted to make that investment.
All right. And then conversely, by moving to primarily uniform rates, as is proposed, are there systems where the customers are going to experience rate shock?
I think that the rate shock and moving to uniform rates would be less than if we kept individual rates for the systems because the burden is spread across all the customers.
Is there any one or more of the systems though that is going to face a sudden increase in rates?
I think the majority of the systems have the lower rates. And so I don't think any one of the systems would be singled out, no, ma'am.
And for the record, do the separate system rates create administrative difficulties for the company or the public staff?
Yes, ma'am. It's complex and complicated.
Tell us a little bit about those difficulties.
Well, just trying to track the different base rates and different user rates can lead to potential errors when trying to bill or making sure you get the right rate codes, et cetera, right? It's just a level of complexity that's not necessarily beneficial.
And does that necessarily mean, if they're separate, does that necessarily mean that they're more costly to maintain? Or is it the case where with regard to this company?
If the separate rates are more costly, I would submit, yes, it is more costly to maintain separate rates.
And what, if any, economies of scale do you expect to have from the uniform rates?
I think more than the economies of scale, the customers will benefit by less rate adjustments for those systems that do require heavy investment. So I'm not sure there's a large economy of scale to be gained there.
All right. And is there any economy of scale that you take a note of, or not really at this point?
Perhaps. I mean, I think the less administrative complexity means less time invested by our staff in maintaining those separate rates. So there may be some.
All right. Are you aware that the North Carolina statute allows water utility to seek adjustments to rates if the rate it is paying is for purchased water changes?
Yes, ma'am.
And if the commission's order in this case set uniform rates for all the systems, all the company systems, would it create substantial administrative difficulties adjusting customer bills if the purchased water expense changes?
As I understand, yes, ma'am.
And you would receive the commission's permission to adjust those rates?
Yes, if we can, I think if I understood your question correctly, if there's a pass-through rate, that would be significantly less expensive and burdensome.
And I'm asking if whether having uniform rates makes that, increases the difficulty, the administrative difficulties. or
If there
not.
were uniform rates for those purchased water systems, yes, ma'am.
It would create more difficulty
Well, as I understand it, if we would have to.
adjusting the customer bills.
Yes, ma'am, if I understand properly, if we had uniform rates and didn't have the ability to pass those purchased water rate increases through, we'd have to come back to the commission for approval to do that, and that would be more expensive, I would think.
All right. My last question right now is, there was a customer complaint that that was filed on February the 8th. And it was that we didn't think is addressed in the company's rebuttal. And that was Nicholas Egan of Ashcroft Park in Greensboro. And he discussed having the red and brown stains in his sinks and toilets, and stated that he'd installed a whole house filter that he changes monthly and that the water pressure was low. And he opposes the increase in light of his water quality issues. Did you look into his specific complaint?
I think we did have the operator look into it and couldn't find a source for his complaint, but we will certainly check into it again and report back should we find a culprit for those water quality issues.
And when you find just a minute ago, we were talking about the green sand filter, and so I asked this way: when you find a water quality issue, or that there are or could be water quality issues within a system, and but it matches the primary drinking water standards, do you think that always resolves the issue, or is there more that the company would seek to do?
Depending on the system and depending on the nature of the issue, if it meets primary drinking water standards, but it's resulting in continual customer complaints, then we would likely investigate, try to determine the cause, and then work with public staff to try and address those secondary complaints or water quality issues.
And is there anything that you know, sitting here today, that you can share with us about the Ashcroft Park system and its water quality or water conditions?
No, ma'am, not on Ashcroft. I'm not aware of any concerns there. We do note the complaint, and we did have our operators check into it, but I'm not aware of a continuing issue there.
All right. Mr. Kleinfeld, do you have questions for Mr. McDonald?
Mr. McDonald, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You indicate you're the managing member of Whole North State, and at least as I've reviewed the filing so far, it seems there's at least one other member. Am I correct, Mr. Michael Myers?
Yes, sir, currently.
Are there any other members besides yourself and Mr. Myers?
No, sir.
Does Mr. Myers have any management role with Old North State?
Currently, none whatsoever.
So it's a member-managed LLC?
I believe it's a manager-managed LLC.
Excuse me, thank you for correcting me, manager-managed LLC,
Yes, sir.
and you are the designated manager?
Yes, sir.
Is there, without getting into confidential information, Mr. Drews, I want to ask a question, but you tell me if it's confidential, and we'll sort of see if we can navigate around it. So what provisions are there in the LLC agreement for a change of manager? How could you be displaced or replaced under the LLC agreement?
I am not aware of a methodology whereby I would be replaced by any rational sense. I mean, is that,
Do you hold an interest in the company, an equity interest in Old North State large enough to prevent you from being replaced as manager? Is that correct?
yes, sir, absolutely.
Mr. Drews, they're not in my materials, but are the articles of operating agreement and the articles of organization of record with the commission?
Not that I know of.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, Mr. Myers does or does not have any position of any kind with Integra?
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. He's not a member. He's not a manager.
He's not operations, anything. He
He's
is
not under any
zip
contract or anything. So,
No, sir.
so Integra is just you,
Yes, sir.
and you are the sole owner
Yes, sir.
and therefore the manager
Yes, sir.
of Integra.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Drews, I want to ask a couple of questions about some material in the application that are marked confidential, but I'm going to try to ask the questions in a way that doesn't elicit confidential answers. So you tell me if the question is going to work or if it's going to call for confidential information. Okay?
I'll do my best.
All right.
And I might add, Mr. McDonald may also have an even better sense of whether it gets into a trade secret territory than I do. So I would also ask him to let us know if he feels it's confidential.
All right. I'm going to try to ask the questions in a fairly general way so we don't get anything detailed or specific. On the balance sheet that was filed with the application, Old North State shows an amount of current assets, including notes receivable. Do you know what those are?
Yes.
Do you know, can you disclose without telling confidential information who is obligated to Old North State on those notes receivable?
I'm not sure I can disclose that without getting into those.
Has that information been provided to the public staff?
I'm not sure of that answer.
All right, I'll hold that one and think on it for a while, okay?
Okay.
Also on the balance sheet, under long-term liabilities, the company is showing an obligation or liability for notes payable.
Yes, sir.
I take it you know what those are?
Yes, sir.
And without disclosing confidential information, can you disclose to whom those notes are payable?
Integra Water.
All of them.
Yes, sir.
The entire balance shown on the confidential balance sheet is payable to Integra.
I believe so. Yes, sir. The notes receivable, I apologize. You caught me a little bit flat-footed there.
That's
I think
all right.
It was, those I believe are, if it's the one I'm thinking about, it's probably a receivable from ONSWC Chatham North, which was an entity that was set up. It was it was for a sewer system, constructing an interconnect between two adjacent sewer systems that did not move forward.
It did not move forward, but it generated an obligation from Old North State Chatham to Old North State
Yes, sir, because it was.
for funds advanced.
There were funds advanced because it was anticipated that one of the large sewer systems that Old North owned was going to be carved out into a separate entity. So
Okay.
that was what was anticipated.
All right, there are other matters that we won't go to there.
Yes, sir.
But you're still carrying that as a collectible asset,
Yes, sir, for now.
and you believe that to be collectible?
In some amount, yes, sir. I don't know at face, but
I'll take the answer for today.
okay,
We'll go into it later if we need to.
fair enough.
I want to be sure I heard you correctly in an answer you gave to Commissioner Brown Bland that the Integra capital structure is approximately 40% equity and approximately 60% debt.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Drews, are the balance sheet, again, because I couldn't find them with the application, or don't know if elsewhere in the record, are the balance sheets of Integra included in the application, or have they been made part of the record?
The answer is no. The company did provide a confidential financial statement of Integra to the public staff. in this proceeding, but we have not entered that as any exhibit.
I suspect as much because Mr. Hinton talks about it, so I had a hunch they had it, but I just wanted to know if it was in the record so we in the commission could see it. Mr. McDonald, have Integra and Old North State Water Company entered into any sort of written agreement for financial support?
No written agreement, no, sir.
No, there's nothing in the nature of a guarantee or a commitment to fund or anything that on paper that obligates Integra to advance funds?
There's a commitment that I made to public staff and in this, but is there, aside from that? No, sure.
All right, thank you. For the present, and I qualify that with for the present because of the circumstances. That's what I have right now.
Commissioner Hughes?
Must have want to just a few follow-up questions from my colleagues. Just on the last, when you say you've provided that commitment, just to be clear, because I saw that in the settlement, that's just was that a verbal, as you're discussing this settlement, that you as an individual commit Integra to be the financial backstop? There wasn't any kind of attestation or anything, just you saying, trust me, I mean, essentially?
I suppose.
Okay.
Yes, public staff very much wanted that, and I take it seriously, but yes, I mean, it's a
Okay,
statement.
yeah, no, I mean, I just want to understand there's not another financial assurance. It's just, I think Commissioner Kleinfelder has that. And, okay. I'm really interested in, as the owner of, for you thinking about your different systems, your original proposal did have this proposal of a uniform rate, and I think that it was to split costs over all the customers evenly. In the end, you're backtracking a little bit, I think, as part of the stipulation on a few of those systems. But putting apart the ability to collect that change in purchase water price, from a technical standpoint, walk me through again the types of systems you have, just in really short terms, because I know you have a lot of different systems. Just talk a little bit about what kind of systems they are and how varied they are.
Okay, sure. So it's sort of the simple end, there's purchased water systems, right, where we buy water from the city of Winston-Salem or somebody and resell it to the customers. There are groundwater systems with a hydropneumatic tank where there's chlorine added and then water is distributed. And then on the more complex side, there are green sand filters and there's some radiological filtration systems on some of the systems to remove those elements before the water is distributed.
Okay, and those the customers served by those systems, if they were just cut separately, would be faced with different rates.
Very much so. I'll give you an example. One of the water systems we're looking at having to add radiological filtration on it, and we're working with the developer on a cost sharing agreement. We haven't really addressed this with public staff that much yet, but the anticipated cost is somewhere around $500,000. Again, we don't have a cost sharing agreement yet. We haven't gotten through that with the developer, but you can imagine the significant rate increase on the size of systems we have, or less than 200 customers. So that would be a significant burden to an individual system.
And then just that burden, though, would be shared with all of your customers, or who would that burden be shared with under the proposed settlement?
Across all the water customers.
Including the purchase water systems?
Yes, sir. The purchase water, so they all have a base rate, but the purchase water systems have a separate variable per thousand rate.
So the base rate for the purchase systems, what's your philosophy? What should be in that base rate to make sure that they're sharing the costs?
As I understand it, you try to address fixed cost with fixed with the base rate, and so a lot of that burden is shared across that base rate. Not sure if I answered your question.
I think so. So someone that has, if I had to purchase water system, I'm going to be carrying some of the load of that more expensive system that is on the other part of the state.
Some, yes, sir.
Okay. No, I think that's the philosophy from what I understand of uniform rates, and because you have an expense one day might mean that you don't have an expense the next day and your neighboring system down the road has an expense. So I understand that. I think what Commissioner Brown was asking for the just billing costs of that. If there was a situation where you could still recover a change in purchase rates expeditiously by changing the rates of all of your customers, would that pose a significant different administrative burden than going in and just changing the price for the 2 or 3 separate purchase systems?
In a perfect world, no, but I think in the complexity of that and addressing the rates and sort of working it through the whole model, I think that becomes difficult to pin down minor purchase water cost to allocate it across all the systems. You can imagine the complexity of with 60 water systems, right? With however many 1,800 customers at the moment, approaching 1,900. And then if the purchase water rate goes up, call it 5 cents per thousand, trying to allocate that across the 1,800 or 1,900 customers in those 60 separate systems, the calculation gets super complex very quickly. Submit, but I mean, you know, it's certainly at the commission's pleasure either way.
Okay, I think that's why I might bring it up again with public staff. But that's good. No further questions.
Mr. McDonald, I do have one more follow-up. So in a response you had made on page 14 of your rebuttal, and the public staff had recommended, you were responding to their recommendation that Integra provide additional funding of approximately you stated that their recommendation that you infuse the equity would cause you to have to provide additional funding of $4.1 million to achieve the 50% equity ratio. Just help me understand what was behind your answer there, how you arrived at that figure when the outstanding debt appeared to be 1.4 million.
I'm not sure about the 1.4 million. Ms. Oakman's my numbers whiz, so I'm looking at her, but that doesn't feel right.
Okay. All right. It's on the page. Let me look. This was from the rebuttal. Let me check.
We can follow up on an answer to that question with the next witness.
Right, and it just may be my error. Just give me a second to check. All right, Mr. McDonald, I think it was my error on that. Consider your answer satisfactory. Thank you. Are there questions on commission's questions, starting with the applicant?
Yes. Mr. McDonald, you were asked about the what are called the formally pending systems where billing began before there was CPCN approval. Could you turn to your rebuttal testimony exhibit 2?
Yes, sir.
And what, does that show the date of application and then the date of the commission order for each of those systems?
Yes, sir.
Now, at the time, were you aware that applying for temporary rates was an option in North Carolina?
I was not.
Okay, are you aware of that now?
Very much so.
Okay, thank you. Would you be willing, if the commission's interested in filing a confidential late filed exhibit that is the financials of Integra?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned a system where radiological filters would be required. Is that old mill trace?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
It is.
And these are just kind of randomly following up on the question, but you were also asked about the difference in cost or operations for purchased water systems. Do you have to install and maintain wells for those systems?
Not for those systems.
Do you have to install and maintain filtration for those systems?
No.
Okay. So they're less expensive to operate on that account?
Correct.
Okay. If you did separate billing for these 44 different water systems in North Carolina, is that going to be more administrative work and cost for the company?
Yes.
With regard to the customer complaint from, I believe it was Nicholas Egan, regarding the Ashcroft Park, are you willing to file a late filed exhibit updating the commission on what you have found out about that complaint, whether there are stain or mineral problems in the water?
Would very much like to do so.
Thank you. Are you also willing to file as a late filed exhibit the papers by which Old North State filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State to be an LLC?
Yes.
The articles of incorporation, as it were?
Yes.
Okay, or the equivalent.
Mr. Drews, I think we'd need the operating agreement too, which doesn't have to be filed with the Secretary of State.
Okay,
Happy to provide that.
we will add that to the late file exhibit.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
I knew what you were trying to do and want to be sure you got done what you wanted to get done.
And we want to make sure you get all of those that you want. So there was some question about whether there's a contract by Integra to backstop financing for Old North State. What's your position with Integra?
I'm the sole member
Okay.
and manager.
And so do you, as a practical matter, control what Integra does?
Absolutely.
And have you provided sworn testimony in this proceeding that you will see that Integra provides the funding that ONS needs?
Yes.
And by ONS, I mean Old North State Water Company.
In addition to having provided it for the last decade. Right.
Thank you. That's all my follow-up.
Thank you. Any questions from the public staff?
No questions from the public staff.
Just a second. Mr. McDonald had one last question. I'll try this one. See, debt accumulated on this level of rate base.
Some of it was operational losses. A lot of it was capital expenditures to maintain these systems.
So, and the level of rate base we see is,
I think that's for the entity as a whole, right? So there's some wastewater systems as well in there that have had some significant gain.
Mr. Drews, you want to follow up on that?
I think we can follow up with the next witness.
Okay. All right, Mr. Drews, your motion?
We would ask that all the pre-filed exhibits of Mr. McDonald be admitted into evidence.
And identified as they were when pre-filed?
Yes, ma'am.
That motion will be allowed, and just to be, out of abundance of caution, I have already allowed the introduction of the direct and the revised direct, the rebuttal and supplemental and settlement testimonies of this witness, Mr. McDonald, and they'll be allowed as if given orally from the witness stand. Be introduced into the record. All right, Mr. McDonald, you're excused.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm corrected for now, you're excused. That applies throughout in the event. I believe that when we conclude whatever we do here today, we will hold the record open in the event that the commission finds that we need to have you back in. Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Old North State calls Laurie Oakman to the stand.
All right. Mr. Oakman, if you place your left hand on the Bible and raise the right, do you sincerely and solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give today shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, Mr. Drews?
Would you state your name and position or relation to Old North State Water Company for the record, please?
Laurie Oakman. I'm the accounting manager for Integra Water LLC, and I oversee the accounting for Old North State Water Company because Integra has an operating agreement whereby it provides support to ONSWC.
Did you cause to be pre-filed on June 29th, 2021, 11 pages of direct testimony in this docket?
Yes, I did.
And do you have 10 pages of rebuttal testimony along with Oakman rebuttal exhibits 1 and 2 that was pre-filed on February 22nd, 2022?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And finally, do you have 4 pages of supplemental rebuttal testimony along with Oakman supplemental rebuttal exhibit 1 that was pre-filed on March 4th, 2022?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any changes or corrections to make to your pre-filed testimonies?
Yes, at page 8 of my rebuttal testimony, the formula error that is addressed at lines 13 and 14 was discussed with public staff, but after they filed their testimony, not before, as stated in lines 6 and 7. And
Okay, go ahead.
And the settlement exhibit reflects the revenues, expenses, rate base, cost of capital, and revenue requirement that the company has agreed are appropriate for the settlement.
And with those changes, if orally given from the witness stand today, would your answers to the questions in the pre-filed testimonies be the same as when those testimonies were filed?
Yes.
Okay. We would move to have Ms. Oakman's pre-filed testimonies incorporated into the record as if orally given from the stand, and her exhibits be identified for the record as marked.
And Mr. Drews, did you ask about the settlement exhibit separately? I have it as the late filed exhibit 1.
Yes, that we have not called that a settlement exhibit. That is separately a late filed exhibit, and we would ask that that also be identified as marked.
And that she prepared that one as well?
Yes, with the assistance of Darlene Peden, who has served as an accounting consultant for the company on this case.
All right, that's correct, Ms. Oakman. You
That is
prepared late filed exhibit 1.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Mr. Drews, your motion will be allowed, and her direct rebuttal and supplemental testimonies will be received into evidence as if given orally from the witness stand. And all exhibits filed with those testimonies will be identified at this time as they were marked when pre-filed.
And just as a point of clarification, we will not be moving into admission of evidence, the late filed exhibit, until the public staff's had a chance to review and ask us any questions on that, which, so I anticipate that'll be post-hearing.
Okay, thank you for that.
Do you have a summary of your testimony?
I do. My direct rebuttal and supplemental rebuttal testimony and exhibits addressed accounting issues in this general rate case. Those issues have been resolved in the settlement agreement between public staff and Old North State Water Company. We have agreed to work with public staff to develop appropriate accounting entries to ensure that customers will not pay for any uncollected tax grows up on CIAC. That process is already underway. In my opinion, the settlement agreement as a whole and its exhibits are a reasonable compromise of the issues in this case. The settlement is fair to both the ratepayers and the company. I urge the commission to approve the settlement and establish new rates in accordance with the settlement. And this concludes my summary.
Ms. Oakman's available for questions.
Any questions from the public staff of this witness?
No questions from the public staff.
All right, Ms. Oakman, I have just a couple. My colleagues might have others, but first, we've noted on your rebuttal testimony, you state that the company will adopt the pass-through rate mechanism for the purchased water systems of, is it Blowell and Rockland subdivisions? In your rebuttal exhibit 2, page 14, you use a charge there of $5.77 per 1,000 gallons for Rockland. And public staff witness Junis, on his exhibit 2, page 17, used a charge of $5.57.
Typographical error. Let me,
are you able to tell by looking at the two?
what I can say is that we were anticipating agreeing what Mr. Junus's calculation was for that rate. So my apologies if that is a typographical error on my exhibit. But
So-
yes, we were going with the public staff's recommendation on the Rockland.
So it's
using
either
those-
577 or
Yes.
557,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
between the two of you, someone will make sure we know which one is
Yes, ma'am.
correct.
Most definitely.
As of the time that you filed the rebuttal testimony, the company was still resolving with the town of Stedman the discrepancy between the company's customer meter readings of 1.7 million gallons and some change on that, and the gallons that the town billed, which was 1,047,000. Has that been resolved?
We are still working with the town to ensure that the readings are accurate on both sides. So there is no resolution as of today, but again, the discussion is still ongoing and we're both working to,
And the company maintains it has the 1.7 million gallon.
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
In other words, you still stand by that number at this point.
Yes, ma'am.
So, do you have a plan? How do you plan on resolving it for the purposes of this rate case?
As far as I know, just open negotiation with the town to ensure that their master meters are reading as they should.
Madam Chair, there may be some confusion on the witness part about resolving this with the town versus the public staff. We have covered this in the settlement agreement.
All right. And Ms.
And we went with the public staff's number, I believe.
Yes, as far as this rate case is concerned, yes, we are in agreement with the public staff's
So the public
assessment.
staff's numbers will be used for purposes of setting rates
Yes, ma'am.
at this point in time?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have for you. Questions, Commissioner Cronfeld?
Thank you. Ms. Oakman, I asked Mr. McDonald some questions related to some items on the company's balance sheet, and I want to follow a little bit with you on those. Again, I'm going to stay away from the numbers so we can avoid confidential information, but I'm sure you're familiar with the balance sheet that was filed with the application.
Yes, sir.
And the long-term liabilities in the form of notes payable that are shown on the balance sheet. When I look at Exhibit B to the application, which is the income statement, there is nothing shown that would indicate that those notes are amortizing. Tell me about those notes. Are they payable on demand, or do they have a fixed maturity?
They are, they are,
That is a question I think Mr. McDonald might be better positioned to answer.
I'm very sorry.
yes. Those. My apologies.
And he can go back on the witness stand to answer it at any point.
Well, let me see if maybe we may need to do that for other purposes. I misunderstood who was going to do what on that. In any event, the income statement filed with the application shows no payment. Is that, those notes are not amortizing currently, correct?
Correct.
On the balance sheet also, I asked Mr. McDonald about the item carried as notes receivable.
Yes, sir.
And as I understand it from Mr. McDonald, and I just want to be sure, I may not have heard him correctly, that what's carried on the balance sheet is the face amount of the
Yes,
notes
sir.
receivable.
Yes, sir.
It's not been discounted for any adjustments for collectability or anything.
No, sir.
And on the income statement filed as Exhibit B, there's nothing that I can see under revenues that shows that that note is amortizing either, that the company's collecting currently anything.
That is
on
correct. There have
And
been
that
no
is-
collections.
In fact, there are no collections currently on that note. All right, let me leave you alone with that then. That's good enough for now. Thanks.
All right. Are there questions or commission's questions? Okay. All right, Mr. Erickman, you getting off light for now. Mr. Drews?
We would move that Ms. Oakman's exhibits as marked and pre-filed would be admitted into evidence with the late filed exhibit coming later.
All right, the exhibits that were pre-filed with witness Oakman's testimonies will be received into evidence at this time and identified as they were marked when pre-filed.
And if the commission would like Mr. McDonald to resume on the stand, we can perhaps follow up on some of those questions now and get them out of the way.
All right, that's good. Mr. McDonald, if you return to the stand and remember you remain under oath.
Mr. McDonald, let me see if I can do it the simplest way possible. Has the company provided to the public staff the documentation showing the terms, the maturity, the tenor, the amortization schedules for these notes payable that are carried on the balance sheet?
I don't know that we've ever provided the notes to the public staff. But
Same
they're not-
question for the notes receivable?
No, sir, I don't believe so. And they're not amortizing.
Are they, let's talk about the notes payable first, that the company's carrying under long-term liabilities. Are those on demand, or do they have a maturity?
I believe they're term notes.
They're term notes?
Yes, sir.
But they're non-amortizing, so they have a balloon payment at the end,
Correct.
and they accrue interest until repayment.
Yes, sir.
Correct. What about the notes receivable? Are those?
I believe those are structured the same way.
They're not on demand, they have a fixed maturity,
Yes, sir.
but they're non-amortizing, and they accrue interest until maturity.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Drews, I think what I'll do is probably just ask for a confidential late file exhibit, which would consist of the evidence of the instruments themselves.
We will file that.
Okay, and that would be filed, I assume, confidentially.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Hughes?
Yeah, I'll ask a question. Same thing. I thought maybe that you, the other witness was more suited for, but it's probably be you. In the start of your summary of your testimony, you say the whole reason you're here is because of the significant loss that the company has been facing. Could you just describe when that loss started in the, since you've been operating in North Carolina and had early on, has it been positive and then recently it's turned negative, or has it been negative for a while?
It's been negative for a while in conjunction with former employees and a partner. It was always intended to come in for a rate case that was going to be handled by others, it was assumed. And when that became clear, that was not going to happen. We pushed forward on our own, green as we were, if you will.
Okay. So it wasn't a strategic decision to get to this point of your losses and then come in. It was more of
Nothing
an
strategic
oversight.
about it whatsoever.
Okay. So that gives me some confidence. No further questions.
Mr. McDonald, do you have firsthand knowledge of who prepared the company's application and the exhibits to the application?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was that?
Mr. Drews and Soapman and me.
I'll add, I was not employed at the law firm at that time.
And Ms.
With
Kimmerer.
regard to the application and direct testimony.
Okay. And so those the actual numbers and information that went into the application, those were prepared by Mr. Drews.
Well, I think on the original application that was prepared by Ms. Kimmerer and Ms. Oakman.
Ms. Oakman. And then what about, to your knowledge, did Ms. Oakman also prepare the updates to the revenues and expenses, rate base, and cost of capital that was filed with us on October 13th?
Yes, ma'am, in conjunction with Ms. Peden.
Okay, all right. Mr. Drews, I asked about those two items because I'm hoping you're going to move them into evidence.
I'm sorry.
The company's application
Yes,
and the updates that Ms. Oakman.
certainly. I mean, it's already there in the record and we would move that into evidence, please.
All right, those will be received at this time.
Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, you may step down.
Thank you.
And you now understand that we mean it when we say again.
Happy to come up again.
All right, Mr. Drews, anything further?
That
From the-
concludes the company's case unless and until the commission calls us back.
All right, and we're going to take a brief break and come back on the record at 2:40. Right, let's come back on the record. All right, I believe the case is now with the public staff.
Thank you, Chair. The public staff calls Charles M. Junis and Iris Morgan as a panel to testify. I will conduct direct and redirect of Mr. Junis, while Ms. Coxon will conduct direct and redirect of Ms. Morgan.
All right, Mr. Jonas and Ms. Morgan, left hand on the Bible, raise your right. Do you sincerely and solemnly swear that the testimony each of you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, Margarita?
And Ms. Chair, sorry, I omitted to mention something. So as the parties have been provided, obviously, with summaries for each of the witnesses, and at the discretion of the commission, the witnesses are obviously willing to read those summaries into the record, but obviously at the commission's discretion. So I just wanted to flag that before I got into everything. So.
All right, we will, as we have done of recent times, we will receive the summaries, but we will dispense with the reading of the summaries.
Perfect. And they're willing and ready to read those. All right. Mr. Junis, could you state your name, business address, and position for the record?
Yes, my name is Charles M. Junis. My business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Dobbs Building, Raleigh, North Carolina, and I am the Director of the Water, Sewer, and Telephone Division of the Public Staff.
And on February 8th, 2022, did you cause to be pre-filed in the Old North State Water Company LLC rate case, direct testimony and question and answer form consisting of 54 pages and 2 exhibits marked Junis Exhibits 1 and 2?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony that you would like to make today?
No, just to sort of state the obvious, there was a billing error in what Bella Vista that has been incorporated in supplemental testimony, but that correction has not been made in the direct testimony.
Thank you. And do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your direct testimony that we'd like to make today?
No.
And obviously incorporating the changes that are already in your supplemental testimony, if I were to ask you those questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Thank you. And on March 1st, 2022, did you cause to be pre-filed supplemental testimony in the Old North State Water Company LLC rate case consisting of 29 pages and 1 exhibit marked Junis Exhibit 2 revised?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your supplemental testimony that you would like to make today?
Yes, one correction. On page 7, the sentence starting on line 1 that states public staff witness, or starts with public staff witness, that sentence was included in error and should be struck.
Thank you. And do you have any changes or corrections to your exhibit to your supplemental testimony you'd like to make?
No.
And so with those changes, obviously with that line deleted, if I were to ask you those same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Thank you. And on March 8th, 2022, did you pre-file testimony in support of the joint settlement agreement and stipulation consisting of 23 pages and 1 exhibit marked Junis Settlement Exhibit 1?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed settlement testimony that you'd like to make today?
No.
Do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibit to your settlement testimony?
No.
And if I were to ask you those same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Commission, I would move that Mr. Junis's pre-filed direct testimony, supplemental testimony, along with the changes and corrections made on the stand today, and settlement testimony be entered into record in this proceeding and copied into the record in their entirety as if given orally from the stand in this docket at the appropriate time, and that Mr. Junis's exhibits attached to his pre-filed direct testimony be identified as Junis ONS Direct Exhibits 1 and 2, and then Mr. Junis's supplemental exhibit attached to his supplemental testimony be identified as Junis ONS Direct Exhibit 2 revised, and Mr. Junis's settlement exhibit attached to his settlement testimony be identified as Junis ONS Settlement Exhibit 1.
Mr. Margarita, that was a mouthful, but that motion will be allowed in its entirety. The testimony will be received and treated as if given orally from the witness stand, and the exhibits will be identified as Mr. Margarita requested.
Thank you. And Mr. Junis, do you have summaries of your testimony?
Yes.
Could you read them at this time, please?
Mr. Moderator, we are dispensing with the
Oh.
reading. I just indicated I would receive them, but
Oh,
but
okay.
I'll dispense with the reading.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair.
That's fine. And,
No further questions from the public staff.
all right, Ms. Coxon, are you gonna
Yes.
bring?
Ms. Morgan, please state your name, business address, and position for the record.
My name is Iris Morgan, and my business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. I am a financial analyst in the water section of the Public Staff Accounting Division and represent the using and consuming public in this proceeding.
On February the 8th, 2022, did you cause to be pre-filed in the Old North State Water Company LLC rate case direct testimony in question and answer form consisting of 25 pages, 1 appendix, and 2 exhibits, Morgan Exhibit Roman numeral 1 and Morgan Exhibit 2?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your testimony that you would like to make today?
No.
Do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your direct testimony that you would like to make today?
No.
If I were to ask you those same questions today on the stand, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
On March 1st, 2022, did you cause to be pre-filed supplemental testimony in the Old North State Water Company LLC rate case consisting of 19 pages and 2 exhibits, Morgan Exhibit Roman numeral 1 and Morgan Exhibit Roman numeral 2?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed supplemental testimony that you would like to make today?
No.
Do you have any changes to the exhibits to your pre-filed supplemental testimony?
No.
And if I ask you those same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
On March 8th, 2022, did you pre-file testimony in support of the joint settlement agreement and stipulation in the Old North State Water Company LLC rate case consisting of 15 pages and 2 exhibits, Morgan Settlement Exhibit Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your settlement testimony?
No.
Do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your supplemental testimony?
No.
If I were to ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I move that Ms. Morgan's pre-filed direct testimony, supplemental testimony, and settlement testimony be entered into the record in this proceeding and copied into the record in their entirety as if given orally from the stand in this docket at the appropriate time, and that Ms. Morgan's appendix be identified as pre-marked, the exhibits attached to her pre-filed direct testimony be identified as Morgan Direct Exhibits Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2, and that Ms. Morgan's supplemental exhibits attached to her supplemental testimony be identified as Morgan ONS Supplemental Exhibits Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2, and Ms. Morgan's settlement exhibit attached to her settlement testimony be identified as Morgan ONS Settlement Exhibits Roman numeral 1 and 2.
Ms. Coxon, I have a notation on my supplemental exhibits that they were as revised. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I apologize.
No problem, but I was just identified as the supplemental exhibits as exhibits Roman number 1 and 2 revised.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So Ms. Coxon's motion will be allowed in the pre-filed testimony of witness Morgan. The direct, the supplemental, and the settlement testimony will be received into evidence at this time as if given orally from the witness stand, and the exhibits will be identified as Ms. Coxon indicated.
Thank you. Mr. Eunice and Ms. Morgan are available for questioning from the commission.
All right. Is there any question? Is there any questions from the applicant?
No, we've waived cross.
I understand, but I have to ask for the record.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Jennison, Ms. Morgan, We have a few questions for you. Mr. Junis, on the matter of customer refunds, the stipulating parties agree that they'll work together on a methodology for calculating the customer refunds that might be due once the final rates are in and approved by the commission. Witness McDonald's rebuttal stated that for the purposes of calculating the refunds, the public staff may recommend a comparison of bills under temporary rates to what the bills would have been under final rates for every individual customer for each month that the rates were in effect. He states that the company preferred method is to calculate by rate division rather than by individual customer. What was the public staff's intention on this matter, on the matter of calculation of the refund?
So I would just say that those positions are somewhat obsolete at this point due to the settlement. However, it was our intention that due to some of the peculiar rate designs or rates for certain systems, that you might get into a situation that those should be looked at on a more granular basis, that you can't just use sort of a 1,000-foot approach to reviewing whether or not refunds are appropriate because you're sort of averaging out the impact. So specifically, and I think this is captured in the settlement, you get into systems like Blaywell and Rockland that had very different base charges and usage charges from the rest of what were sort of air quotes uniform that were traditionally like a $15 base charge or a $5 usage charge. So that's really what the position was that was expressed.
And so at the time of filing, that was the actual dispute between the two as to whether by division or whether by individual bills for every month. Is that correct?
So again, functionally, we recognized that you wouldn't have to get to an individual bill level for every single customer, recognizing the likelihood that rates, not only the base charge, but also the usage charge, were going to be higher for most of the systems. And it was the public staff's position that that was an issue that would be resolved after the commission's order came out, to where you were actually doing that analysis.
All right, I appreciate that. Just trying to get an understanding.
Absolutely. And if you have more questions on that, I'm happy to answer them.
On the uniform rates, why has the public staff recommended pass-through rates for purchased water systems as opposed to uniform rates on all the company systems?
Yeah, so I would say, based on my experience with the public staff, I've traditionally seen it done in this manner, that you would have your purchased water systems with a separate, at the very least, a separate usage charge, to then be able to properly account for that in a potential pass-through. And getting to the point of a pass-through, it's a lot easier to quantify a direct link of, okay, if the rate is $3 and it's changing to $4, it's really easy to then make that rate change as a pass-through specific to that system, as opposed to trying to allocate that usage rate increase across a set of customers, say 43 systems, because it's going to be a much smaller increment, and it's going to be somewhat dependent on the amount of water purchased. While if you just do a straight pass-through of a potential usage charge, if usage varies, you will still appropriately recover that cost or not overcharge customers in the alternative.
So if the commission were to order the uniform rates on all the systems, including the purchased water systems, would it be your understanding that the company would still be able to come to the commission for an adjustment to rates under the statute?
I would say that would be different from how I've seen it done, but I think that it potentially could still be done that way. But it does, like I said, become a little more dependent on the usage. And so let's say this pass-through happens a year from now. Are we going to maintain the billing determinants that were used in this rate case to pass that increased cost to all the customers? Or are we going to do some sort of updated billing analysis, which then becomes pretty administratively burdensome on the parties for what is typically a relatively easy and expedited process?
What factors caused the public staff to recommend the uniform rates for the non-purchase water systems rather than the system-specific rates for the company?
It is our understanding that it has been the policy of the commission to support uniform rates. And that has also been the position of the public staff, at least in recent memory. And we certainly recognize the value of uniform rates, of sharing those costs, because, today one system may be more costly, and perhaps tomorrow that will be one of the more efficient systems, and vice versa. An efficient system today may need improvements in the future. For example, Old North State has some older systems that right now may be some of its most cost efficient. When it comes time for potentially replacement of that distribution system, or if the need for filtration would arise, that system now is facing a large cost. And to the point of scale, these are predominantly small, well-sourced water systems that, for example, the Twin Lake Farms that was brought up earlier, that's only 82 customers. So you spread a couple $100,000 filter only on those customers, it becomes pretty costly pretty quickly.
All right, so over time, it would be your position that someone incurring more cost or more expense today, later in the future, that it would even out over time across the customer base?
Yes, at least in theory, that's how it should work.
All right, and to your knowledge, are there systems within the Old North State set of systems that have unusual cost or unusual cost savings as compared with others?
I would say for the most part, at least in general, all of these systems, with the exception of the two purchased water, are supplied by wells. They are relatively small in terms of the number of customers, so their economies of scale are relatively similar. Do have some difference in necessity of treatment, but that's something that could change in a relatively short amount of time, either by degradation of water quality or the development of new standards in the future. So we think that the uniform rates are a fair approach.
You would characterize today that there are no extreme outliers that you see?
I don't think that there are any extreme outliers that would justify system-specific rates, with the exception of the two purchased water systems as we've designed with the different usage charge, but the uniform base.
All right, and do the separate system rates create administrative difficulties for the company and the public staff?
If there were to be system-specific rates, or at least a continuation of the current rate structure, yes, it is administratively more challenging. Just from a perspective of an order, you have to list now 43 systems different rates, as opposed to one uniform rate and a couple of purchased water rates. And then, to try to bill, you could run into issues of, oops, I mixed up Bella Vista and Bellaterra. So it is ripe for potential issues.
And are there efficiencies achieved when it's uniform versus separate?
Yes, I think there are efficiencies when you have a uniform rate. I think it would streamline your billing processes. I think it would make customer service easier, so then you're not causing confusion if somebody would have a question about their bill.
Have you experienced we have systems that are uniform. Have you experienced those efficiencies in your time with public staff?
Yes, I think, for example, Aqua with hundreds of systems with basically a uniform charge with a few peculiarities, that there are efficiencies to that.
Mr. Jonas, there were several customer complaints that weren't addressed in your testimony, were not addressed in your testimony, and they involved low pressure and sediment in Shiloh, staining and low pressure in Leon Landing, calcium and odor in Rockland, staining in Ethan's Meadow, low pressure and staining in Ashcroft, staining and sediment at Brook Meadow, loss of water, low pressure at Bingham Woods, and scum in toilet bowls in Mornington Estates. In general, did the public staff investigate, or how did the public staff investigate the service quality issues in this case?
So in general, we certainly reviewed the consumer statements. We listened in on the customer testimony. We reviewed the company's report, and then we did an analysis on our own. For example, I had researched on Drinking Water Watch, Ashcroft Park. Their most recent inorganic sample, taken August 24th, 2021, was actually below the reporting limits for both iron and manganese, which would typically, especially iron, be representative if someone was experiencing red or brown water. I'm not saying that they didn't experience that. I certainly trust the customer's representation, but I think it more is likely to have been sort of a one-off instance. You could have a slight crack in a main to where you were getting some soil infiltrating the line, but generally that does not appear to be an iron and manganese issue. In addition, our review involved coordinating with DEQ regarding the company's compliance. Based on the last 3 years, it's our understanding that they had only reporting and testing issues. And to add some more context, that's literally just, they didn't take the test when it was prescribed or required to be taken. Those issues have been resolved to my understanding. And then reporting, that literally means that they forgot to send the results to DEQ. While still important, we were not seeing wide violations of water quality standards.
So are you satisfied that the customers in the subdivisions that had those issues that I just outlined there, that those customers have adequate water quality today?
I would say that we are overall satisfied. If those customers continue to experience issues, we would ask that they contact the company. If they continue to be unsatisfied with that response, that they would either file a consumer statement or reach out to our consumer services division, and we would look into it further.
And the public staff recommended that the company file quarterly reports on certain subdivisions. Today, as you sit here, are there, should they be required to make quarterly reports on any of those that I just listed, any of the other ones?
At this time, I continue to support the systems that we made our recommendation. I think it's perfectly within the purview of the commission, and we would be supportive if additional quarterly reporting was done on a few other systems. And the company could always seek relief from that reporting if it's proven that there's not an ongoing issue.
So as of today, the agreement, as we see it, was with Fishhawk Ranch, Old Mill Trace, and Blaney Farms, those three?
That's correct.
All right, and in Mr. Hinton's testimony, he stated that the company's existing capital structure of 83% debt to 17% equity poses an unreasonable risk to ratepayers. Is that something that the public staff evaluates when it looks at the company's application for a CPCN as opposed to a general rate case?
So I would say that question is probably better suited for Mr. Hinton. I would add that we certainly evaluate the financial viability of a utility when seeking a CPCN.
And finally, when we look at Mr. McDonald's rebuttal exhibit 2, we see a long gap there of 2 years in some cases between the filing of the application for the CPCN or the notice for contiguous extension and the date before the commission approved it. Did the public staff have anything to add about why that occurred, or did they, do you think the public staff acted in a timely manner when they were reviewing those notices and applications and getting them in front of us, the commission?
So regarding that exhibit, we did send discovery for sort of 2 pieces of information, and that dealt with whether they filed any amendment to that application and whether they had any discovery pending to the public staff. So many times those initial applications were either incomplete or required additional information through discovery. I would say previous staff at Old North State did not respond in a timely fashion or did not follow up on those issues. So in general, I think we did address them timely. There were some complicating factors with some of the more recent ones with the CIAC tax gross up implications and trying to develop language that would be appropriate to include in a proposed order. I think in general, if a utility has an issue with the timing of us taking items to staff conference, they could always file a motion or they could reach out to us to prompt that. I would say typically if a utility requests that an issue be expedited because of, for instance, hey, we know we're going to be adding on customers, then we usually try to prioritize that filing.
All right. And in general, based on what we see here about the timing, do you think, being aware of what our job is to do you think that the commission has reason to be concerned about it? Or should do any more to alter that situation in the future? And I'm just asking for your opinion.
I'm just trying to choose my words appropriately. I do want to add to my previous response that another issue was the posting of bond, that can also hold up an item being taken to staff conference, because typically we want that bond posted in advance of bringing a proposed order to the commission's attention.
Do you know if the bond was an issue with some of these cases, just in general?
I believe so, with at least a couple of them.
All right.
And then regarding just process, I think it's mostly a recognition of that the companies need to file the required exhibits in a timely manner. And if they are not acting in a timely manner, then, we have to prioritize our work. So we move as needed on those items.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Morgan, I think that the stipulation filings answered the questions that I had for you. So you might be getting off, but let me see what my colleagues have to say. Any questions for this panel? Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. Either one can answer. It's probably mostly for you, Mr. Junis. You mentioned checking the financial viability during a CPCN. Could you comment other times that you might check the financial viability of a utility like Old North State?
So certainly during any transfer, if they were acquiring a system, we would consider financial viability. I would say also during a rate case, obviously we're checking their financials pretty closely and financial viability. We also have the opportunity to review annual reports, and we usually are reviewing those and flagging if we anticipate an issue based on those annual reports.
Had you based on that response, had you flagged Old North State for financial viability concerns the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years?
Again, I think Mr. Hinton would be appropriate to answer that. I will add, though, that, anytime we're seeing repeated operating losses for a utility on their annual reports, it starts to raise a concern of what is going on there and their long-term viability.
And what would just the typical, if you did notice that, what would be the next course of action?
I think it depends on the circumstances. If we're not seeing a lot of active growth in terms of acquisitions, then I'd say if there's not a lot of filings, if they're not making acquisitions, if they're not growing, then we would have to consider what might be an appropriate course of action. If there are a lot of those filings, then we have those opportunities to do checkups. Another option is to consider an alteration to their bond if we felt that there was an issue. But again, I would let Mr. Hinton add to this if he is asked this question.
Okay, well, I want to find the part that you want to answer, but then I'll take your advice too. Do you know if any communication had occurred to Old North State about just general financial viability during the past,
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. One of the concerns we have is making sure rates are just and reasonable, but the rate shock issue comes up quite a bit. Could you just say, just in general, but for this utility as well, what's your feelings about how far we as the commissioner or you should go to prevent rate shock in a more of a proactive manner?
It definitely has to be evaluated, I think, on sort of a case-by-case basis. One assist to rate shock is the possibility of temporary rates. So then you sort of stagger in an increase. I think if there is a need for rate cases, that they be filed, because if you have a long holdout, this is what you get is a pretty sizable increase, over 50% increase for these customers. Make the argument that they've been undercharged to some degree prior to this. And so that factors into sort of this big increase. But yeah, I think it's a matter of timely rate increases. I don't think anybody wants a rate case every year, but recognizing when that need arises to come in and file a rate case. Alternatively, the commission could consider, I guess, this would be unusual and new and kind of brainstorming here, but an incremental increase of, say, sort of like a temporary rate increase that would sort of step into the full rate increase. That sort of concept in recognition of, okay, you've been out a long time, and this is a big increase, and to sort of slowly step into it for customers.
Okay, I appreciate that. I know we don't often talk about protecting customers from rates that are too low. But I think this case has shown us that can be an issue. To switch gears just a little bit, you did a great job explaining the value of uniform rates, and given these systems, it makes sense. There was a lot of discussion about individual systems that have particularly high costs, and uniform rates are an excellent way of spreading those high costs among a larger group. I'm just curious, I'm kind of wrapping my head around the inverse. Under our current system, how are a system that have unusually low rates, just because they're in an area that has surface water or access to a municipality, are those benefits shared in a fair manner among all of the sort of sister systems across the uniform rates? Does that question make sense? Because in this particular case, it seems like the final recommendation is two small systems are going to benefit quite a bit from their proximity to lower cost public system water. And I just sort of wrapping my head around a fairness issue for that.
Yeah, I think there is some sharing. Obviously, that system, not only do you have less infrastructure, so they don't have wells, they don't have well houses, they don't have pumps, they don't have treatment. They do not have as much time to operate. And partially, a lot of those costs are captured in that usage charge and that base charge that is the purchased water. But those are a lot of cost savings that I think is shared to some degree with the form base charge in this case. I could see what you're contemplating here of, should it be all uniform? Should you have these two purchased water systems? It's my opinion that it's appropriate to have these two purchased water systems because of just how different those usage charges are for these systems. And again, capturing potential pass-throughs, is it appropriate for them to field that cost entirely in a pass-through? Or should you spread potential increase of one aspect of operations to all the customers because those systems are close to in proximity? And it can cut both ways. There are systems with $15 usage charges for other utilities. It just happens to be in this case that it's the lower.
I appreciate that. No additional questions. Thanks.
All right. Are there questions on the commission's questions?
No questions from the public staff.
Right.
Just a couple, please.
All right, Mr. Drews?
Mr. Junis, is it your understanding there's 43 systems with Old North State now that have active water customers?
Yes.
Subject to check.
Yeah.
Okay. And Rockland and Blaywell are the only two with purchased water, as far as you know?
That's correct.
Okay. And in terms of the refund methodology questions, I'll ask you for a non-binding estimate here. Is it your estimate that Rockland and Blaywell are likely to be the only two that could expect refunds off of the temporary rates?
Based on our proposed rate design, stemming from the settlement, that is likely the case.
Okay. You had mentioned one of the issues with the systems where there were pending applications for a while was delays with the posting of bonds. Do you know that those systems were wastewater systems, not water systems?
I don't know for a fact.
Okay.
At this time.
You're not sure if it was water or wastewater?
I think there were situations of both, but I could be wrong.
And there were some questions on checking financial viability over time. And if there's anyone here who's appreciative of limited bandwidth for public resources, it's me. But I did, on the flip side, wanted to ask, for a very small water utility without much in the way of professional resources or management, it's not your Aqua or Carolina Water. Is it a really big lift to put together a general rate case?
I would say general rate cases are challenging. I think depending on your size, administratively, Old North State and Integra are relatively thin to the benefit of customers. And so then to put together a rate case at this scale with 43 systems could be challenging.
And without reference simply to Old North State, but in general, smaller systems, could that be a reason why maybe some of them incur losses rather than come in for a rate case every year?
I think smaller ones, there's some level of intimidation of the unknown. We do have some like Sexpaw, CMP that do file regularly. They've sort of acclimated to the process, but that first one can be the hardest for sure.
Thanks, that's all my questions.
All right. Mr. Margarero and Ms. Coxter.
No redirect from the public staff.
I'll entertain your motion on the evidence.
Commission, we've moved that the pre-filed testimony, supplemental testimony were applicable. Actually, I think supplemental testimony and supplemental testimony for both Mr. Junis and Ms. Morgan be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand in this docket this time.
All right, I believe the testimony has already been received, and I'm referring to the exhibits. I had not yet received them into evidence, but I'll receive the exhibits that were identified and pre-filed with Mr. Junis's testimony. I received them into evidence at this time.
So the commission is waiting on Ms. Morgan's exhibits. Got that right?
Correct.
I would move that Ms. Morgan's, that the exhibits attached to her pre-filed direct testimony be identified as Morgan Direct Exhibits Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2, and that Ms. Morgan's supplemental exhibits attached to her supplemental testimony be identified as Morgan ONS Supplemental Exhibits Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2, and that Ms. Morgan's settlement exhibit attached to her settlement testimony be identified as Morgan ONS Settlement Exhibits Roman numeral 1 and 2, and that those exhibits be entered into the record.
All right, that motion will be allowed, and those exhibits are received, and they are identified as Mr. Margarero indicated.
Thank you.
I believe that we have all of those. So you may step down.
We'll appreciate it. And if you want to call us back up, I'm happy to do that.
We will. We might have to even it out since we had Mr. Mcdonald back up already. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. As our chair would say, you got off the hook.
At this time, the public staff calls John R. Hinton to testify, and I'll be conducting direct and redirect of Mr. Hinton.
All right. It's been a while, Mr. Hinton, since you actually had to put your hand on the Bible for us, but would you do that? Left hand on the Bible, raise your right. Do you sincerely and solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right.
Please state your name, business address, and position for the record.
My name is John Robert Hinton. I work at 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm the Director of the Economic Research Division for the public staff.
Thank you. And on February 8th, 2022, did you cause to be pre-filed in the Old North State rate case direct testimony and question and answer form consisting of 44 pages, 1 appendix, and 3 exhibits marked Hinton Exhibit Roman numeral 1 and Hinton Exhibits 2 and 3?
Yes, and I believe there's Exhibit 4.
Is there Exhibit 4? My apologies. Did you also did you also cause to be pre-filed Exhibit 4?
Yes.
Apologies about that. Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony that you'd like to make today?
Yes.
And please proceed.
The changes on pages 4 and 5. On lines 10 and 11 on page 4, I like to remove the words which is the ultimate parent of CWSNC.
And that's removing those words, correct? Okay.
Similar on page 5, line 7. Remove the word affiliate related.
And those are the entirety of the changes you'd make?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any changes or corrections to the 4 exhibits to your direct testimony that you'd like to make today?
No.
And including those changes that you made to pages 4 and 5, and the additional changes with regards to removing certain language, if I were to ask you all those questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, it would.
Thank you. And on March 8th, 2022, did you pre-file testimony in support of the joint settlement agreement and stipulation in the Old North State rate case consisting of 7 pages and 1 exhibit marked Hinton Settlement Exhibit 1?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections you'd like to make to your pre-filed settlement testimony?
No.
Do you have any changes or corrections you'd like to make to the exhibit to your settlement testimony?
No.
So if I were to ask you those same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
This time, I would move that Mr. Hinton's pre-filed direct testimony and settlement testimony be entered into the record in this proceeding and copied into the record in their entirety as if given orally from the stand in this docket, including the changes and corrections that were made orally today on the stand, and that Mr. Hinton's appendix be identified as pre-marked. Mr. Hinton's exhibits attached to his pre-filed direct testimony be identified as Hinton O&S Direct Exhibits Roman numeral 1, Hinton O&S Direct Exhibit 2, Hinton O&S Direct Exhibit 3, and Hinton O&S Direct Exhibit 4, and that Mr. Hinton's settlement exhibit attached to his settlement testimony be identified as Hinton O&S Settlement Exhibit 1.
All right, Mr. Marguerite, that motion will be allowed, and Mr. Hinton's pre-filed testimony, both direct and the settlement, will be received into evidence at this time and treated as if given orally from the witness stand, and the exhibits will be identified as you so indicated.
Thank you. No further questions from the public staff, and at this time, Mr. Hinton is available for questioning.
All right. Are there any questions for this witness from the applicant? All right, Mr. Hinton, just a few. In your vast experience, and that's a recognition that you've been around here for a while, has the commission ever approved rates based on a hypothetical capital structure with an equity layer much larger than the company's actual capital structure?
Now, you're asking, I hate to ask you, have we ever approved a capital structure with 83% debt in the cap? Is that what you're actually asking me, Mrs.?
Well, that gets it mighty specific, but I'm looking in that general range. If you see that far of a misalignment or.
No, I can clearly say that the public staff has never recommended and the commission has never approved anything close to 83% debt leverage capital structure.
Do you have any recollection of that situation coming before the commission and knowledge of what how it was approached?
I cannot recall any time I've ever seen any filing with this much debt leveraging. It was unusual, and it called for me to take a different tack on this case.
All right. you testified that for regulatory purposes, the type of debt carried by the company is generally viewed as equity capital. Why is that?
Because it's not at a full arm's length distance or negotiations. It's like loaning money to your child to buy a new car. And that's what I was led to believe. There was a parent subsidiary relationship. And so when we see that, and we've seen it more than once, that we consider that to be equity financing, because even though there was a term with this notes, and there was a rate with these notes, it still is not a binding contract if Old North State didn't pay Integral Water for that money or the other subsidiaries. So we don't see that as arm's length. We don't see the rate that was come up was considered by market forces representing the appropriate cost of debt capital. And so the cost rate was in question. The contract was in question. It's from the parent company pushed down to the associated company. Thus, I consider that equity for rate making purposes.
Have we ever given, such a hypothetical capital structure?
No, ma'am. I've never seen anything like that before the commission, or like I said, anything with that kind of debt leverage. It was rather odd.
I recall that there was an idea that you suggested. Is that correct? The hypothetical to
Yes.
give a hypothetical. What made you do that?
Well, this is the long history of the public staff. It's not that unusual when you have contributed water systems where the plant is, paid for by the developer. The developer wants to wash his hands of the system. He gives it to a water company without a rate base, because the new water company can't apply that as his own rate base because they didn't put the capital up to his contributed system. So it's not that unusual. We see rate cases with small water companies that have 100% equity. It's rare you ever see something with 100% debt or 83% debt, but it's not that unusual to see a very low amount of actual rate base in the company. So the use of a hypothetical has been applied, and like I said in my testimony, for over 40 years. But it's applied in cases where the actual capitalization ratios are suspect or very quick, and this is one of those cases.
Did the capitalization ratios of Integra play any role in your thinking about this?
Yes, it did. As I developed into the system, and I believe, as my understanding from, again, discussions with Mr. Mcdonald and his commitment that he made before in settlement negotiations, that he would fund this company. So I would have to look at the actual financial backing of Integral Water, LLC, which I did. And as you'll be provided those confidential financial statements, I think you will come to a conclusion similar to that I came to, that Integral Water LLC is financially viable and can provide capital to Old North State Water Company.
And so you weighed that in accepting the commitment that was being made to fund Old North State?
Correct. Yeah, as notified in my supplemental testimony, that supplemental testimony, that's the nexus that gave me the ability to go further with this company, because unless they could provide that relationship and that solid foundation that LLC had, the company that is associated with John Mcdonald, and you see I'm reluctant to say affiliate because they're not a true affiliate through our investigation.
And what can you explain? What do you mean by that?
Well, it was discovered that there's not an affiliate contract relationship between Integral Water LLC and Old North State directly. It's not an affiliate subsidiary relationship, as you see with Duke Energy Carolina and other large-scale utilities. But what the common co-owner is, of course, John Mcdonald. And so when we met with Mr. Mcdonald and his testimony he's given today, plus his commitment he's expressed in the meeting, and plus the documents he's provided, have given me enough confidence that I believe that Integra Water LLC, through the management and ownership of John Mcdonald, is adequate for my purposes to think they're financially viable, to believe they're financially viable. So I could go beyond what I did in my pre-file testimony, which was more like, this is a company with 83% debt. It's not, what it does in reality, it makes my job much more difficult, because I want to find a market determined rate of return for debt and equity. I cannot do that with a company that sets the leverage. There's not a market for securities with companies that risky. It's like going to the bank and applying for your first loan on your house, and I'd like to borrow, $100,000, but, I don't have any equity. I've got all debt on my other balance sheet. On my balance sheet, the bank would say, no, thank you. So likewise, the actual required rate of return that equity holder would require to invest money into a company that only has 13 or 17% equity on its balance sheet would be something greater than what we commonly give water utilities, which is around the 9% mark. So it makes anything of this kind of leveraging makes my job extremely difficult and quite subjective. And that's not the way I want to do my business. So over the years, going back to the old Montclair method that's noted in my testimony, the use of a hypothetical capital structure makes sense in applying a reasonable cost rates for both debt and equity. That's the basis how I would do this case. But the ultimate financial the ability that Integra has to provide capital for future capital expansion projects and ongoing day-to-day operations is important.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hinton. One last question is, given Integra's actual cost of debt is 6%, explain why it is not appropriate, or why that isn't an appropriate cost of debt for the company instead of the 4.6 that's used in the stipulation.
Again, it goes back to, that debt rate was something that was not a market determined rate, I don't believe. I have no evidence of that. I did learn that it is the discovery that there's a term on it. I mean, it's not just an open-ended demand payment. But as brought out, there's questionable treatment of those interest costs. So I assume it's a balloon payment as indicated by testimony by Mr. McDonald. It's not a debt between two parties, a bank and that lends capital to the utility and expects to be paid back on appropriate times and agreed upon interest rate. That's not what we see here. We see a parent subsidiary providing capital, which again, from my eyes, is considered equity, because the Old North State is not under a contract, a legally binding contract to pay back the parent.
I appreciate your explanation, Mr. Hinton. Are there further questions for this witness? Commissioner Clyde-Belton?
Want to stay with the topic that Commissioner Brown Bland's been exploring. You changed your testimony on page 5 to delete the phrase affiliate related, and is it your understanding then that two entities which are under common control and common ownership are not affiliates?
It's not affiliated in the normal rate making practices that we use in here. Now, at least to my mind, it's a common ownership is how I would view it.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. That helps. You were using the word affiliate to mean something narrower than maybe the general legal definition.
Correct.
Okay, I follow you. I understand you. Thank you. Let me stay with the same topic though and ask. I'm being a lawyer, I know just barely enough about the Uniform System of Accounts and GAAP to be quite dangerous. Given the structure of this affiliation, not not in the sense you use for rate-making purposes, but the legal affiliation that exists here between these two entities that are under common ownership and common management. How is this debt classified under the FERC Uniform System of Accounts or under GAAP?
I don't feel I'm competent to answer that. I would assume on the annual report, it's debt, but I don't know if it follows GAAP, to be honest with you. I can't answer that.
Should I have asked Ms. Morgan that question?
I'm afraid so.
I've done it again. Well, I'll leave the question hanging out there because we'll do some more research on that and see what we can find out about it. I asked Mr. McDonald some questions about the Old North State balance sheet, and you were in the hearing room and you heard the questions. Did you do any investigation to satisfy yourself that the value at which the notes receivable carried on the company's balance sheet as an asset, that those are properly valued for purposes of the balance sheet?
No, I did not. I did not give that level of detail.
Thank you. No, I'm going to have our staff do it.
Commissioner Hughes?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hinton. Is it your opinion that without any kind of rate change, just as the finances, as you understood it, coming into this rate case, that this utility wouldn't be classified as a viable utility?
I mean, the rate change would be part of the equation, without doubt. You touched on some of your other questions with Mr. Junius about financial viability, and his answer was parallels to my answer. And that is, I think the single most reason companies become financially non-viable is because they do not file for timely rate cases. And also, you need to look a little under the hood. When they file for rate cases, if you don't see any testimony by anyone from the Economic Research Division, it generally means they asked for less than they were entitled to get. And that suggests, it puts a foil with the public staff, in my personal opinion, because one side says the lowest rates possible, but then I'm here waiting for him. What about financial viability? And I'm afraid I'll lose most of those arguments. But we don't, I mean, that narrow argument, let me just say that. Because but it does happen. There's a case I'm looking at now that is a concern. And but it's not, you don't normally go into, I don't believe accounting or engineering or economic research will go into a rate case that you should charge, make sure you file your testimony ahead of time, make sure you have asked for a lot of money so we have something to work with. But there are cases, there's not many cases each year, but there's a case a year at least, where someone will make an application for a rate increase and not ask for enough capital or enough revenues to support a rate of return that's at least equal or greater than what we would require. And if it's greater, we ask for an adjustment. We bring it down to what we think is appropriate. Like 7% today is the number that we think is appropriate for small water utilities and sewer utilities. But if they ask for 5, then you won't see any testimony by anybody from my division.
Okay, do you, obviously we're in a general rate case and this caught your attention. Are you involved? I think I asked this question to Mr. Junius. Are you involved in any other kind of review of either leveraging or financial viability and losses for all those smaller systems that are out there, and how these Old North State was before they came in?
Yes, our division has been looking at financial viability for quite some time. And we generally apply, I mean, when companies come in, typical applications for transfers, and they want to transfer a utility from X to Y. So we want to make sure the new utility owner is financially viable to take on the system and has the managerial and Mr. Junius would then touch on technical viability, but the financial viability is one thing that our division has worked on for years, and we're asked to review that on a routine basis. It can get a little messy. The projected financial statements of the commission request and transfer application is most valuable. A lot of times you'll see companies that will be losing money for a couple of years, and then they'll come out at the end of the 5-year period with a positive. And that does carry weight in our thinking. Also, the capital structure that underlies the new owner, we'll look into that. We'll ask data requests on their financial statements for that company. We'll ask if, I mean, it may seem silly, we ask for liens or any judgments on the company, and we make sure this is a clean company owner that's coming into existence. But largely, it's a financial review, and we look at the credit metrics that largely S&P developed years ago, or Moody's developed years ago, and they are applicable. Years ago, the NRI and I participated in some of the financial viability issues with the EPA. There were some short-term financial ratios like the quick ratio. Looking at those things that could actually help provide a basis for predicting a non-viable system, or at least analyzing whether the system is non-viable. It's hard to do that often. So what I go back is the standard financial valuations that typically take place when you go to buy your first house or car, and I mean not a car, but your first house. So we'll look at S&P financial benchmarks. I'll look at their leveraging. So on this case, if a company came in to acquire North State and they had 83% leverage, I would not approve that. That would not pass any test of reasonableness. And so in this case, when they filed 83% for a rate case, I was somewhat taken back by it. And that's why I had to, look under the hood and proceed as if we did.
Okay, I think you've gotten kind of to the end of conclusion. Is there something we can do so you wouldn't be surprised in the future? In this particular, I don't think anybody likes surprises when they're talking about.
Let me add one more thing. One of the key things I look at, I'm leaning on Chuck as he leans on me. Excuse me, Mr. Junis. One of the first things I'll do for financial viability is I'll go to engineering and I'll say, how is there DINA violations? Quality service. Because if they're short of money and they have all these violations, then that's a clear sign that they're financially non-viable or not at the point they need to be. But and in particular in this case here, I had numerous conversations with Mr. Junis and came to the realization that the system is in reasonable shape. So that again went far in abating my concerns about 83% capital structure.
Yeah, thanks. I think you've answered my question. I appreciate it.
All right, Mr. Hinton, one more question. Could you explain how the Montclair method translates an operating margin to an appropriate rate of return on rate base, and how it supports the 7% rate of return?
Okay. Well, it's not the Montclair method, and I'm sure we use parts of it. As I outlined in my testimony, it used to be an old method that was started back in 1981, and I proceeded to using that method for hundreds and hundreds of cases during the 80s, 90s, and then around 2000, it no longer was appropriate. I addressed in my testimony. The method, the adjustment to my method that we made to the model to make it reasonable is that we knew that Carolina Water and Aqua and companies that have audited financial statements, that we had confidence in their capitalization ratios. And going to be, give me a second here, but often these are small water companies, their capital structure is the least concern of the company. And their books are quite questionable. So going back to the Montclair method, we felt or the modified Montclair method would be a better way to describe it, is that we felt that any water utility in North Carolina should not be penalized because this company is poorly managed financially. It should not pay an additional rate of return because it's small. And that's been an issue that we've addressed in countless ROE, return on equity issues over the years. And so I came up with the appropriate overall rate of return looking at the Carolina Water and the Aqua cases, you know, and I adjust over time that what I think is a reasonable representative cost, overall cost of capital, noting that Carolina Water often has a high cost of debt, similar to a smaller water company, but then again, Aqua has a lower cost debt. So I think the average is again representative of what I think a small water utility should strive to, and I don't believe that our customers should pay anything more. Now, your question was how does the rate of return relate to the margin? Okay. There's no empirical way that I know to come up with an appropriate margin rate. And that has left me somewhat without any guns or ways to approach this issue. So years ago, when the margin rate was no longer deeming an appropriate way, that was the risk-free rate plus 3%. I felt that we had to make a change because it was not reasonable. We were getting margin rates around 4%. Now, the reason that the return on margin, the key link from two is that I believe that the main risk to the utility owner when he has a very little rate base and a high level of operating expenses is the expenses. So when that is the case, and accounting they will apply in their revenue requirement calculation whenever the rate base is smaller than the operating expenses, they will routinely use operating expenses as the basis for what we approach the margin to. And the thinking behind that, again, is that the risk parameter to the owner is more akin to the variability in operating expenses. You know, maybe a pump may go down, but it's not going to have massive capital outlays to keep the plant running. And there have been several cases over the past, large water cases, that have kept operating ratios for years because that was its nexus of working it. You know, it just didn't believe in investing a lot of capital in its plant, or didn't need to for whatever reason. Again, could have been a contributed systems, and that led to a low requirement for capital, for external capital, but instead they had to have a routine amount of capital spent on just maintaining the system. So the answer to your question again, if I'm sorry, I'm filling up the record with a lot of conversation, but I could not come up with a margin rate because the data is not there to come up with what I thought was appropriate. There's not financial literature out there. It's not stock reports. It's just not available. So given that situation, I said the best way to do it is they should get no more than what's appropriate for a water utility that's based on rate-based investment.
So through your examination of it, how does it support the 7% rate of return?
Because
I'm just saying, how'd you get there to that number?
On my testimony, I outlined a couple cases. The more recent approved Aqua case and Carolina Water case, and the average of those two overall cost of capitals was roughly 7.1%, and I rounded that to 7.0%. So that's the basis for why I come up with the reasonable margin. There's been a recent operating ratio water utility where another person in our division, Mr. Tron, recommended a 7% margin, and you know, not too long ago it was a 7.25% and 7.5%. And we keep coming down. I expect going forward, the rates may go up as new orders are processed that involve Carolina Water and Aqua. And I may down the road add PLURS to that because PLURS has audited financial statements. The point of the matter is that I want the margin rate should equal the rate of return on rate base on overall cost of capital, not just on the overall cost of capital. So I want to base that observation on a company that's gone through a detailed cost of capital investigation, one where the company presents its witnesses and the public staff presents our witnesses, and the commission makes a judicial decision. And I feel that is the appropriate cost, overall cost of capital or margin rate.
All right. Commissioner Kleinfelder?
Mr. Hinton, why did in the settlement stipulation, why did the public staff withdraw its recommendation that the company file audited financial statements with the commission?
We went to that level again because the application reflected extremely high leverage capital structure and it brought much in question. We withdrew it because, to be honest with you, we've never requested that of any company before the commission, to my knowledge, that they file audited financial statements. They file their annual report and they testify, they file that with the expectation it's accurate. But we don't generally require audited financials.
You haven't had a company before with a book debt to equity ratio of 83-17, nor with the debt being held by My Broadword, an affiliate, or some of the significant assets owed by My Broad Term, an affiliate. You haven't had that situation either, have you?
Not exactly, but we've had concerns. You go back in the eons of books, there's Mid-South Water Company. I performed a financial audit on the company. Kurt Kibler, who was an accountant with the public staff, performed an accounting audit on the company because this is a case that was back in the late 90s, I believe. And we did just that. We did a thorough audit on their debt and their equity and their accounting books. So it has happened before, and we made filings to the commission. Unfortunately, I've been trying to find all my my filings, and it was pre-electronic paper. So but there was such an audit, and so it has happened that we were. I remember the case clearly because at least Cox was then the head of accounting division, questioned the reporting that was being provided, and the service quality was somewhat in question as well by the head of water division. So those two things combined together brought me into the equation, and myself and the accountant did a thorough investigation. We eventually found they improved their accounting records, and I found out they actually did have capital available to sustain operations and support future capital expenditures. But we've done that before. It's been a question before, and we've done our homework, and we made sure the public was protected. But the case did not have 83% leverage. I can testify to that. But again, this case, as I've said, in my mind, when it crosses my desk, I do not view that as true debt. I view that as equity for rate making purposes. But it doesn't mean it has to pass the other financial tests. And that's what the consolidated financial statements of Integra Water LLC gave me that confidence. So I could back off the audited as well as the insistence they come up with a 50-50 capital structure that I'm hearing. And if you remember, my testimony also said they had to maintain a 45% degree of leverage. And we have removed those three constraints because we believe the company will honor its word and serve the customers in an appropriate fashion.
You base that on the consolidated statements, not on the statements of Integra, unconsolidated statement of Integra alone.
I didn't see those, to be honest with you. I just saw the
You
consolidated.
saw the consolidated
Yeah.
statement. Thanks for the, thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
All right, are there questions on the commission's questions? Mr. Margarita?
No questions from the public staff.
All right, from the applicant?
Mr. Hinton, were the confidential financial statements provided to you just for Integra, or were they for the consolidated Integra and Old North State?
Well,
If you're not sure, that's okay, but I just.
I
wanted to
am
clear
not
it.
sure because of the ownership issue. I'm thinking there the consolidated total of both companies. But to be honest with you, I can't really testify that because that wasn't done through a data request. That was done through a courtesy filing.
I think I heard you say in response to a question from the chair that the 6% debt owed by Old North State to Integra was not a legally binding debt.
Well, I never saw support for that. I did see a term and I did see a rate. So it's possibly, again, I'll look to counsel, but my thinking, it was not legally binding.
Did you ask for any contracts or debt instrument documentation?
No, I didn't.
Okay. There was a question about how this debt's classified under the uniform system of accounts or generally accepted accounting principles. Do you know if this has been recorded on the company's books as notes payable - associated companies?
That's how I would think it was recorded, because that's how it was presented to me.
Okay. Regarding audited financial statements, is that something that's generally done for publicly traded companies or companies with a major third-party independent creditor?
Oh, yes, but not for small water companies.
Yeah. Do you know roughly a ballpark figure for what it could cost to do audited financial statements?
No, I don't, but it is a substantial amount of money. I mean, surely above $10,000 or in that ballpark,
Yeah.
several $1,000s.
It could be 15 to 25,000 a year.
It would not surprise me.
Okay. Regarding, again, this question of the debt cost for Old North State and the imputed levels, in your testimony, one of the comparisons you made was Carolina Water Service docket W-354 sub 360. Do you remember that?
I think it's in my direct
Okay.
testimony, correct.
And in that docket, are you aware the debt cost of that company was 5.36%?
Yes,
Okay, and so you're actually recommending a lower debt cost for Old North State, and that's part of the settlement, is that correct?
that is correct.
Okay, that's all my questions.
All right. Mr. Margarira,
Nothing from the public staff.
we got, Ms. Margarira, you weren't quick enough. Commissioner Kleinfeld to have that question.
Mr. Drews, thank you for pointing out to me in your questions that I was not complete in my question. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to complete the question. The financial consolidated statements that you saw, were there entities other than Integra or Old North State Water Company that were consolidated?
Yes, they have several operations in Alabama which lent their money. So I believe it's in my testimony, but my answer is that yes, the debt is carried by the parent company, and well as a couple of subsidiaries have lent Old North State capital. So it's not just the pure LLC, but it's the.
I recall that from your testimony, and I remember reading that. I want to be sure that my question is clear to you. Is those entities that are also have debt owed to them by Old North State, those entities were consolidated in the financial statements that you saw?
Yes, that I'm confident.
They were consolidated with Integra.
I'm confident they were consolidated. They were consolidated within Integra Water LLC because they're part of the holding the companies that John Mcdonald owns. What I wasn't 100% confident on is the date of that financial statement. I believe logic would say it includes both all the subsidiaries of Integra Water LLC and Old North State Water Company. I'm pretty confident that's the case. But however, I did not ask that particular question in data request as we normally do. But it was provided to me with that understanding. So I can feel confident that the financial statements that you will be provided will include both all the assets and liabilities of Integra Water LLC, its subsidiaries, and Old North State.
Thank you, sir.
Did that prompt any questions? Any questions on Commission's questions? All right. All right, Mr. Margarira, we will hear you on your exhibits and your evidence.
At this time, we would move that Mr. Hinton's pre-filed direct testimony and settlement testimony be entered into the record, and Mr. Hinton's exhibits attached to his pre-filed direct testimony be identified as Hinton ONS Direct Exhibits Roman numeral 1, Hinton ONS Direct Exhibit 2, and Hinton ONS Direct Exhibit 3 and 4, and that Mr. Hinton's settlement exhibit, attached to his settlement testimony be identified as Hinton ONS Settlement Exhibit 1.
And received into evidence. That's your motion, that we receive these exhibits into evidence at this
That
time?
is, sorry.
All right, that motion is allowed, and Mr. Hinton's exhibits to both direct and the settlement testimony will be received into evidence at this time. Mr. Hinton, you're free to step down for now. All right. Anything further from the public staff?
Mr. Chair, I think previously Commissioner Clark-Belcher had requested some additional information with regards to, if I'm remembering correctly, sort of how shared accounts might be sort of recorded with regards to, for lack of a better word, and I'm not using these precisely, these terms, but affiliated sort of entities, how those accounts would be recorded and treated. We would request at this time that the public staff be allowed to file a late file exhibit that would sort of expound upon and respond to Commissioner Clark-Belcher's question, if that would be permissible.
That is permissible and desirable, so thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be comparing your answers with our staff's answers.
So, I may be confused on this, so forgive me if so, but with regard to the joint settlement agreement and stipulation, do we have that in evidence at this time? Or are we holding until everyone's had a greater opportunity for review?
Well, from the company's perspective, we're happy to move it into evidence as a housekeeping matter.
All right, is there no objection?
No objection from the public staff with regards to that motion.
All right, that motion will be allowed, and we'll receive the agreement, the stipulation, and the concurrently filed exhibits. And also, sorry that I'm out of order a little bit, but the report, the company's report on the customer comments, commission would like to have those in evidence if that's not objectionable.
Yes, we would move that into evidence as well.
All right, they will be received into evidence at this time. I think we have made it through to what we can do today. And as I said at the outset, we want to have the time to go through and have our staff go through those filings that were made today, especially over the last couple of days, I'll say. And so what we will do is hold the record open and to receive the late filed exhibits that Mr. Drews has already indicated that the company would be agreeable to file. And the commission will issue an order at a later date as to filing of the proposed order. Or if we need you to come back on a certain date to provide further information. Are we all on the same page? Have I left something undone? It's been a while since I've been in the real room to do this, so not in the Zoom world, and so that might have me just a bit off my game here. So that's why I'm just double checking and asking everybody, crossing my I's, dotting my I's, crossing my T's. Mr. Clark-Belcher.
With your permission, Madam Chair, I want to be sure Mr. Drews and I are on the same page as to what I had asked for at least, and there may be other things that are pending, but I was asking for the documentation evidencing the notes receivable carried on the asset side of the balance sheet and the notes payable carried on the liability side of the balance sheet. And with respect to the consolidated financial statements that were provided to Mr. Hinton, I want to be sure that we get not only the consolidated statements themselves, but the consolidating statements.
And could you explain that difference to me?
As I understand it, at least as I say, from the lawyer's dangerous vantage point, the consolidating statements show you what adjustments are made for each entity in order to get to the consolidated statement. Did I get that right? I'm told from the back by my brains that I got it right.
Okay, and I've made notes in, I'm open to confer with public staff and commission staff on a list of these late filed exhibits to make sure we're all together on what you need.
Appreciate that from you, Mr. Drews. And since one lawyer was speaking to another lawyer, I'm glad you have Ms. Oakman and Ms. Peden to your right. All right, if there's nothing else to come before the commission at this time, we will be adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.